Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well. Today I wanted to compare the Surefire X300 compared to the Streamlight, and specifically to the TLR-7A and to the TLR-3. However, later in the video I do want to compare the Surefire and just talk over some of my thoughts comparing it to the TLR-1 HL. I don't have that on hand, however, I have a few thoughts regarding that, so chapters or timestamps, whichever you prefer to call them, will be in the description below. Otherwise, how I'm going to be comparing these lights is I'm going to be taking these out to 15 meters and 25 meters. I'm just going to put out a target and I'll just play the footage and I'll commentate over my thoughts on it. So let's go ahead and get started on that, and then I'll give my thoughts a bit more at the end. Starting at 15 meters, and then we're going to move to 25. The order I'm doing this is from the dimmest to the brightest, so starting with the TLR-3, then it's going to be the TLR-7, and then the Surefire X300U. So on this TLR-3 you can see, so the footage is a little bit deceptive. It's hard to tell exactly what a light looks like when you're looking at it through a camera, but it's not as bright as it actually looks like in the video, and you'll see when we compare it to the other lights as well. I'm not sure why the camera in this specific instance made it look so bright, where it's washing out the entire target. Not the case in real life. It is bright enough at 15 meters, you can tell everything that's going on, and it's good that way. And there is a pretty noticeable hotspot, and then you have the kind of secondary beam around that. Now here on the TLR-7, you can see there is a lot less of a hotspot. Also, I noticed that the color temperature is a lot cooler on the TLR-7 than it is on the TLR-3. And it's not an issue in either case. Both of these are close enough. Now, color temperature does matter, but it's so slight that it's fine either way. One thing that's a little bit hard to see in this footage here, there is a very big flood with this TLR-7. So much so that it actually goes beyond the bounds of the camera and what you can see here in the footage. Not by much, but just a little bit. And there is still a little bit of a hotspot too, of course, so it wouldn't do terrible at range, but of course with this large of a flood, keep in mind this is not going to be the best light when you start getting a little bit further. Last up here at 15 meters is the Surefire X300U, and you can see I quite like the color temperature on this one. You can see it's very pure white. As I mentioned, the other two, it's not really an issue, but it is noticeable that they're different. In the case of the Surefire X300, you have a very noticeable hotspot that goes a pretty good range out there. And then you also have a secondary that is, I would say, a little bit larger than the TLR-3s, though as far as that, it's a pretty comparable flood. We're going to do the exact same test now at 25 meters, again starting with the TLR-3. One thing I noticed that is, again, kind of hard to pick up in the footage is at 25, you can still make out the target, but if you see the target that I'm using here, it's just a very basic target of like a guy holding a gun up towards you. And I noticed at 25, it's very hard to tell if that target is actually holding a gun or if it's just someone with their arms in front of them. Now, of course, this is a two-dimensional target, so how shadows would work if someone was actually holding up a gun to you would be quite different in real life, but it is interesting to note that it does get pretty hard to tell what's going on at this distance with this light. And now we're moving to the TLR-7. You can see it's a little bit brighter than the TLR-3, and it actually was in real life as well. But with this TLR-7, I didn't have any trouble figuring out that the target there was holding a gun. I would definitely be able to tell that. Here again, it's pretty hard to see on the footage, but if you look to the sides, you can see pretty much everything is just a little bit lit up, and in real life it was very lit up. I could see my surroundings quite a bit, as I mentioned, because of how large the flood is on this TLR-7. And back to the X300U, there is less flood here than there is on the TLR-7, but you can hopefully see that there is still a little bit around the sides. Another thing I did to test these lights is I took them off the guns and I shined them at another person and had them vice versa shine them at me in order to test the effects of the photonic barrier and also to see simultaneously which flashlight would defeat the other, because a brighter flashlight should defeat a dimmer flashlight. And then I also did it again here, recording it, which is Unfortunately, yet again, it's a little bit hard to tell the difference in the video. What I noticed in real life is, in pitch black, of course, these are all going to create a pretty decent photonic barrier, but if your opponent themselves have a flashlight, it gets very interesting very quick. What I noticed is that the TLR-3, when you shine it, actually both against the TLR-7 and, of course, against the Surefire, these are both brighter, but the TLR-7 isn't that much brighter, so I was a little bit surprised that it completely defeated the TLR-3, and it reduces it to just pretty much a little dot where it's actually being emitted from the light itself, and you can see the rest of the person entirely. When you compare that to the TLR-7, surprisingly, it was actually, I would say, partially defeated as well by the TLR-3, so they kind of vice versa were able to defeat each other. However, if you don't have another light pointing at the TLR-7, it actually does surprisingly well, and I would kind of say that it punches above its weight class because of this enormous flood. It gives it kind of a brighter effect than it really has, which does help in a good bit of situations, especially with a handgun. However, the brighter Surefire X300 could not be defeated by either of these dimmer lights, so the actual brightness on paper, the lumens, the candela, do actually make a difference. They are by no means a end-all be-all. Some people go completely crazy over lumens, don't do that. But it does actually make a difference, and it is a point that is worth looking at. And also, it is a lot easier to identify your targets when you have that brighter light. Alright, so we're back. As for my own thoughts, I do think that the Surefire did better than both of these Streamlights in pretty much every category. However, as I mentioned, I did want to talk about the TLR-1, and for that I'm going to be referencing this. This is the TLR-3, but there's a few differences when comparing the Surefire X300U to the TLR-1, which, although I don't have it on hand, I can use the TLR-3 for reference. For me, the reason I went with the Surefire X300 over the TLR-1 HL myself is because although they are very similar, one place that I particularly like that is better on the X300 is on the user controls. So on here, on the X300, you have very firm controls, not so much that they're difficult to actuate, but enough to where you can't ND them. On this TLR, or on any of the Streamlights I should say, you just kind of give it a little bit of a push and it turns on. You can see right now it's on the toggle on, and now it's on the momentary. You just push it up in one direction for momentary and push it down for the toggle. Comparing that to the X300, you have a very firm push to put this on to the toggle mode. And admittedly, one part I don't like about the X300, speaking of the user controls, is it is a little bit hard to toggle it back off. I tend to just use the momentary more so. And for momentary on this, you just push it forward with this finger here. Or you can use your trigger finger as well. It's ambidextrous in that regard. And as far as durability is concerned, the TLR-3 is a polymer body, so I would say it's less durable. However, if you're talking about the TLR-1 HL, as I keep bringing up, that is aluminum. So in terms of the TLR-1 and the Surefire, I would say they're probably about the same in durability. And then to just talk about a few more of the Streamlights, and going back to the ones I actually talked about, like the TLR-7, I don't really like the controls on this at all. I would say I don't mind as much the controls on this right here. I still do prefer the X300's controls better, but yeah, I definitely don't like the controls on the TLR-7. For this, you still push it down. It's a bit hard to see. It's a bit more low profile, but you still do have a lever here that you just push down to turn it on. And you can push it forward, just like on a Surefire in this case, to do a momentary on or off, which is nice. But for me, I feel like this one is way too easy to accidentally actuate, so I'm not a fan of the controls on this one. To conclude, between the Surefire X300 and the Streamlight TLR-3 and TLR-7 that I reviewed here today, I would hands down say that the Surefire is a better option. However, when you get to the TLR-1 HL, it becomes a lot more comparable. And I would say at that point, as I mentioned earlier, I still think the X300 is better, but at that point, it really depends on your own budget. You're not going to be getting a bad light if you go with the TLR-1 HL. But at least for me personally, I do like the X300 better. Although a few of the statistics, for example, I was looking, the Candela actually does exceed the X300 on that Streamlight TLR-1HL. The controls are such an important part, in my opinion. You'd never ever want to ND this in a real situation where you actually need to deploy the gun. For a quality light such as the Surefire, you're really not paying a whole lot more. The price can fluctuate depending on where you buy it from. In some stores, the Streamlight will be significantly less expensive, and in others, they won't be that different. So I would say, at least right now with how the prices are, definitely go with a Surefire. That covers it for my thoughts on the Surefire compared to a few Streamlights. Hopefully you all found this informative. Let me know if you have any other questions, or if there's anything you feel like I missed, feel free to leave that in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.